Can you hear this?
I don't think we can hear you if you're trying to talk.
That's because I was muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear
Okay,
you now.
awesome. I'm going to test something else out. And if you could let me know if you can hear me, that would be good.
Yeah, sure.
Happy Saturday, folks.
Could you hear him?
Yes.
Awesome. So you guys, you know that I am going to ask you, you don't have to do it right now, but when we are hit 4:30, unless you have an issue around privacy, like I have an issue around privacy, my dog is misbehaving. I'm going to ask you to turn your cameras on. So I'll announce that in the class. Sorry, I can't. I'm teaching. Barnaby. So that's going to probably be pretty regular that Barnaby is going to act up. We're just going to have to put up with him. Thank you for putting your camera on. So everyone, you should be able to see the exhortation to put your camera on, meaning that, of course, I understand that there might be privacy issues or exceptional things that prevent you from putting your camera on. But I would really like to see your faces, get to know you. And yeah, of course, you don't have to put it on until 4:30 when we start. So if you're in the coffee shop, that's all good. One of the reasons that I'm insistent about the camera is because I've had students who are like at work, working and taking the class, and that's just not being present. And so, yeah. Have any of your other instructors in online classes insisted on the camera? Yeah, no, I see yeses and nos. All right, you have about a minute more. So I think like the main concern in the introductions that I heard from you guys, it's the reading. A lot of you are intimidated by the reading and the just amount of things that we're gonna do in 5 classes. But that ought to cheer you up in a way, 5 classes. How much can we really do in 5 classes? So I'm undoubtedly as busy or more busy than you, so I don't want to give myself a whole lot to do. And so don't expect to have tons of work heaped on you, but reading 2 novels over the course of 5 weeks, it's doable. And then the poetry, we're going to actually do that in class because while some of it is translated and you'll have it in English and French, some of it is just in French. So you'll look at it before class and then we'll work on it in class. Okay, so it is 4:30 and everybody sees the note that says, unless you have something going on, which I totally be fine with that once I get an email and I'll put you as present. But yeah, I would like you to keep your cameras on unless there's some reason that you can't. Okay, so I'm gonna just take attendance, then we're going to go over the syllabus a little bit, and then we're going to actually not have a guest speaker. My guest speaker wasn't able to come. He works for Ancestry.com. He's sort of the specialist at Ancestry in South Louisiana genealogy, and his work prevented him from being able to attend. However, he has a large social media presence, including YouTube videos that he regularly puts out to discuss things around Louisiana and Louisiana language identity, I should say languages. And we do have Jonathan Maillet, who's here, who's going to be a guest speaker next week. And he's part of the Louisiana Corrivini and French revitalization movement. He's an artist. And so I won't go too far into who he is because we'll work on Jonathan next week. Hi, Jonathan. So
hey, Robin, how y'all doing?
Hi. First thing you should know about Nichols students is they are reserved. They are a reserved people. Is Gracie here?
I'm here.
Once you get to know them, they warm up, but I actually don't know these students, so I'm getting to know them too. Alyssa. Know Alyssa? Ridge. I would have sworn I saw the
I'm
name.
here. Yeah,
You are
I'm
here? Okay, awesome. Ridge Arsenault. Taylor.
I'm here.
You're here. Mason Chenier from Oklahoma.
I'm
Is
here.
Mason here? Mason from Oklahoma. Do you have roots in Louisiana with that Chenier name?
I do. My
Yeah.
family's from Louisiana.
That makes sense. Although there's a whole Louisiana, Oklahoma connection that we can talk about later. How about Connor Sheremy? You're here? Where's Connor? Did you raise your hand? No, no Connor. All right. All good. Catherine, who I know. Nice to see
Here.
you, Catherine. Adela,
I'm here.
hold on, raise your hand so I can see. I just heard I'm here and I couldn't see your, oh, there you are. I see you. Okay, cool. Amanda? Nope. Okay, Shadriana?
I'm here.
Did I say it right?
Shedriana, yes, ma'am.
Shadriana, okay. Linda?
I'm here.
Raise your hand again for me, Linda. Okay, cool. All right, Shadriana, why will that not? There we go. All right. Yeah. I think that you might, nope, there's still some people. Caleb,
I'm here.
all right. Caleb, are you from the River Parishes?
No, I'm from La Rose.
La Rose. Ethan? Ethan Knockout, I see you. Ethan, let me know what's up with your camera. And Levin,
Here.
did I say it right, Levin?
Yes, ma'am.
Levin. All right, and is that, oh, there's bunches of you. Caroline. Pontiff, awesome. All right, Terrio, Drew,
I'm present.
excellent. Carly,
Here.
and you're the last one. All right. So I did ask everybody to go onto the little social area and to introduce yourself. And some of you did that. And some of you didn't. So if you haven't, please do. Oops, and I bumped us out. Let's go to the class. So as you can see, I teach lots of English and lots of French. And for those who are concerned, all of these classes I teach. So yeah, I'm not going to make this a heavy homework load. But I do want you to do the reading outside of class. So that is what I expect you to do. Plus this little project that we're going to work on today, dividing that up to who's going to do what. Excuse me. So that's just the boilerplate information, how to contact me, all of that. And the big thing that you're going to do each week is turn in discussion questions. So I'm not going to give you discussion questions from here on out. You are going to give me discussion questions, and then we're going to choose which questions in a group we're going to discuss. Okay, so this is what some people call a flipped classroom. And I asked this before, and nobody knew what a flipped classroom, or nobody was familiar with the concept. So that none of your professors say, I'm not going to stand up here and lecture. Well, I'm going to tell my
Most
colleagues
of my classes are like that.
that they stand up and lecture
No, they make us do discussion.
because you're an English major. What about the non-English majory people? Do they stand up there and lecture? No artists who are like doing their thing? Okay, so let's see. We have,
Dr. White,
yes.
they have a few things in the chat, but we can't see your screen.
Oh, you
whenever
can't.
put something else up over it. Yes,
Oh.
ma'am. We could just see black
All right,
boxes.
thank you.
You're
You just, yeah, always tell me because I think you can see it. And can you see, what you should be seeing is, hold on, let me try that again. I want you to see the syllabus. And let me see why it won't let me do that. Huh, it's not letting me share that syllabus. I'll try one more time. It's like it's its own window and it won't let me do it. What are you seeing?
We can see it now.
Okay, so all that stuff is just where to find me. Then there's the late work caveat. Just because this is a quick class, there's no late work. I got too many other things to do, as do you. So you must turn it in on time. We're meeting 5 times every week here between 4:30 and 7:30. And we're probably going to need a break because we're all tired and exhausted at the end of the semester, and 3 hours straight is a long time. We have these 2 trips. So this one is on the 10th, 10 o'clock a.m. at Laura Plantation, and then the next one to New Orleans. Okay, so here we go with how the grading works. So you need to attend to get your attendance points. You need to turn in discussion questions to get your discussion question points. You need to participate to get your participation. And then there's the big final presentation. The final presentation shouldn't be too long because there's 13 of you. And so if everybody does 5 to 10 minutes, that's the class. So plan on, let's see, plan on 10 minutes and we'll see how that goes for the presentation. Okay, so we also have these themes in the class. So we're going to Canada. Has anybody been to Canada? So Canada is really interesting linguistically because there's minority languages, and then there's the French speakers, which you're familiar with, and there's the Quebecois, who make up the majority of the French speakers. The Quebecois really don't think of themselves as Canadians. Does anybody off the top of their head know why they would say we're not really Canadians? We don't want to be Canadians.
It's because the Canadians are more of a British a rule rather than the Quebecans that consider themselves more French.
Exactly, because they don't appreciate this whole monarchy thing. They kind of look at the United States as, yeah, you broke away from the monarch, you broke away from the queen. And so they are on that level. We don't really identify with this whole British Commonwealth thing. And we have a culture and an identity. And part of that is French. And we kept the French alive. Okay, so now there's 2 other big provinces where French is spoken. And one of them, I'm sure you've heard me say many times in the introductions to the class. So where did the Acadians come from?
Nova Scotia.
Exactly. Today it is called Nova Scotia, and the 2 provinces are Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. New Brunswick is officially bilingual, and Nova Scotia has French as with just a minority language status. Well, here we are in Louisiana, and everyone knows that at some point people spoke French, right? But then there's a million myths around it, which is it was never written, or people don't understand each other's French, even within Louisiana, or the French don't understand Louisianans, or the Louisianans don't understand the French. And the Quebecois, we are not those people because we're Acadian. So all of that is this, any of those rumors, and I know some people, this is not like your thing and it's not your family's thing, although there are a lot of people with very French or Latin last names in the class. So have you heard any of those things, that it's not a written language in Louisiana? Well, this is going to blow your mind. So there were more French newspapers in Louisiana than in Quebec. So in Quebec, in the 19th century, today, of course, there's more French newspapers in Quebec, but in the 19th century, Louisiana had more literacy, had more circulating papers than Quebec. So what happened? What happened that we had this very functional French-speaking community even after we became American? What happened? So that's sort of what I want to look into in this class. Why did this happen? Why is it that today we don't even know how many French speakers are in Louisiana? So it is clear in Canada, 22 million people speak French. There's no question, there's no confusion. Do you guys know how many people speak French in Louisiana? Guess what? No one else does. Have you ever met a Louisiana French speaker? Who's met someone here yeah, so quite a few of you. Yep. And if you have never met anyone who speaks French natively in Louisiana, Jonathan, who's here, is a native Louisianan who speaks French. And then Christophe is another one who's going to be here in 2 weeks. And they're out there, I promise. And some of them are young. Okay. So one of the things that gets people off track about French in Louisiana is the one thing everybody knows is that there's this, the Cajuns are out there. There are Cajuns. Maybe some of you think of you as Cajuns, but we're not starting with Cajuns because what predates the Cajun phenomenon is that Louisiana is Creole. And so just starting today, we're going to hear that the Creole thing goes way back from the 17th century. So in the 1600s, there were people who were born here who called themselves Creoles. The first Louisiana Creole was born in 1682 or something. So why do we all know that there's Cajuns, and what does that have to do with Acadianness? We'll talk about that, and we'll learn about what the Acadian diaspora is. And this is the book that you should legit be not worried about, because you can just bring in questions if you don't understand it. So if there's one thing that I'm worried about, it's that this is a big honking book, and that my 200 level students were like, I don't understand. And yet it's the one thing that everybody somehow does know, that Acadians exist and that there's some connection with Louisiana. So if you're not sure what to do next week, so next week I want you to read up to page 150. Just bring in the parts you don't understand. Say like, I don't know what's going in. So I don't know what's going on. So part of the class is figuring out what these perspectives are that might be new, that might be seemingly unfamiliar, because yeah, the whole Louisiana Creole thing, that this might come as a big surprise to you when we go to Laura Plantation, just how much people identified as being Creole. Okay, so we're gonna also learn a little bit, and I'm not an expert really in North American Francophone literature. It's not truly my field, but I do have a sense of like why French language is alive in Canada and why French language is sort of teetering here, but there's revitalization. So we're going to talk about this. And then we're going to do a lot of contrasting, comparing and contrasting between Anglophone and Francophone Canada, Anglophone and Francophone Louisiana. So Anglophone just means English speaking and Francophone just means Spanish speaking. And then we're going to, like, last but not least, to sort of have a sense that there's these different varieties of French, and there are different languages that are traditionally spoken in Louisiana. So whether you are totally pixelated with this, or it's part of your family, or this is all new and you're not that interested in it, these are the kinds of things that hopefully we're going to have answers for, about like, is it true that French is not mutually comprehensible? If you have a French person and a Louisiana French speaking person, will they not understand each other? So that is these are the questions that we're gonna answer. So one of them that's really important is this whole sense of people not being understandable. Another one is the idea that French was banned or outlawed. Have you run up against this or heard that people were punished for speaking French? Okay, so I need for us to answer these questions from you guys is to understand what primary sources are and secondary sources. What is a primary source? What is a
is it like something that's been written or survived from someone who actually witnessed whatever they're talking about in the source?
A primary source could be that, so you're sort of talking about like a witness testimony.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or like, yeah, it's something like that, I guess.
It could be a witness testimony in a court case. So like a primary source could be the laws that are actually written. So the anecdote of French was outlawed, everyone knows this, French was outlawed. Where does it say that? What is when and where and who ever outlawed it? And where do laws get written up in any state? We have a thing that is called a constitution. And so they get revised. And so I'm going to make you go back and look at things like the constitutions of Louisiana. Okay, so this is a little confusing the way I've organized things. There's basically two sets of topics here. One is related to language. So this is the big part of your grade. It's to do a presentation. So the first set is language and the second set is culture. And first I thought I was just going to have a free for all and we'd figure it out. And then I decided we're not going to do it that way because that's going to be confusing. So everybody's going to have a set from here, from culture, and a set from one question from culture and one question from language. And we're going to go to a Google Doc and figure out who's going to do what in a second. So if you're interested in was French actually banned in Louisiana, and you go and look up the court documents and you find that, like, I want to find that out, then you're going to also do you're going to do the culture question. So that I just grouped it that way to like not cause us all an organizational headache. So just be thinking about these. This is getting kind of granular with laws. It's a very specific sort of research. Another primary source could be newspapers. Secondary sources would be books that talk about the laws in the newspapers. A secondary source would be an article, a peer-reviewed article that would show us what the primary sources say. Does that make sense to everybody? So you're going to have to use primary and secondary sources, but I really want you to get to those primary sources. So let's say you're like, oh God, I just want to do this honors class and go to Canada, and this isn't totally my thing. This is a more general kind of question, which is, are languages banned in the United States ever? Does anyone know? Has anybody ever heard of other people being told, no, you cannot speak XYZ language? And yet we all have heard, right? Has anybody not heard that in Louisiana, French was banned? Is that news to anyone? So do you think, just off the top of your head, what do you guys think? Do you think languages have been banned other places?
Yeah, I don't think it's been banned, but I've heard from like my mother that they heavily discouraged the use of French when she was in school. She told me
Heavily
how she-
discouraged. Yeah.
yeah.
And
And
who's
she-
the they?
The teachers, the school system, the
So
principals.
okay, so that's definitely something that I've heard a lot, and I definitely believe it. Do you think this happens other places?
I could definitely say it happened to other places. It's happened. I
Like-
bet it's happening right now.
Where do you think it's happening right now as we speak, that people are being told they can't use whatever language they speak at home?
Yeah, probably with places with a higher kind of Mexican immigrants, those
Okay, so maybe
children
Spanish
that
speakers.
can for English.
Okay, what,
Right.
okay, so where else could this this thing of like saying to people, this language, whatever this language you're using, don't use it, I'm discouraging you, the teacher. What other historical events in the United States might this have happened in?
With
Yeah.
the Native Americans.
Oh, yeah. I can tell you right now that like white America is not like, yeah, let's encourage native languages. Let's encourage their indigenous tongue. No, yeah, definitely. They've been discouraged from using their language. Who else might have been discouraged? So my mother was born to a very old mother. My grandmother was old when she had my mother. My great grandparents were German immigrants. My grandmother went to school speaking German as her first language. Guess what her teachers did to her? You think they were like, awesome, she speaks German. They literally did what? What do you think?
They probably punished her for speaking German.
They did, yep. And my grandmother had very little, she could still speak it and understand it, but like no accent. She didn't sound like a German speaker when she spoke. So basically, is there anybody who's not been punished for having to do what? What's the word I'm looking for?
Assimilate?
Assimilate. Exactly, that was the word. All right, so yeah, so if you're interested in this bigger question, what is assimilation? And doesn't assimilation on one level, it sounds kind of good, right? Like we want people to assimilate and be a part of society, and assimilation doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? But what do you lose with assimilation?
You lose diversity.
You do. You absolutely lose diversity. So if like the bigger questions around what assimilation means, what immigration is about, what diversity means, if that is interesting to you, then you should work on this question too, like the other languages, including French, how have they been treated? Because there's other places in the United States where French was heavily discouraged. Does anybody know where else French was spoken by local people and there was pressure on them to not use it? Not Louisiana. It's a state that is way high up north, right next to Quebec. What would that be?
Isn't it like Maine?
It
Weren't there a
is.
lot of speakers in Maine?
Right. And there are a lot of French speakers in Maine, partially because it's right there. And there's a whole immigration in the 19th century of Francophones from Quebec and from Nova Scotia to the United States to get jobs. And partially because it's just, borders, there's people on both sides and who speak both languages. Okay, so the third question is, it's the whole, how did Canada do this? So we got rid of, we didn't get rid of, but we pretty much discouraged French. And today, today there's 22%. I think I just said 22 million people speak French. It's 22% of Canada speaks French. Canada's a small country. There's not that many people there. But 8 million is really, that's a pretty big number. That's a chunk of people. Ireland is only 4 or 5 million people. So that's twice the size of Ireland speak French. So what are the laws in Canada? So since we're going to Canada, I'm very hopeful and I think we are gonna go. How did they do it? And we should learn more about where we're going. And so again, I want for any of these, for your presentation, primary sources, what are the laws? How does their system work? And then finally, this is for people who are really into it. like me, who want the granular, what is French all about? I am not a linguist, so, but I love to learn about it, which is, what are the dialects? What are the varieties? And there's this other language called Corivini that means Creole. It's the word in Creole for Creole. Does that make sense to everybody? So like the word in French for French is français. So the word in Creole for Creole is Corivini, which is a language that sometimes people say is derived from French or is broken French, but linguists try to just look at languages as their own thing. And it's pretty useless to always try to get back to what's the original mother of this word or thing. So it's this language in Louisiana that has also been spoken for 300 years. It's been here since the 18th century. So people who like language in particular, this last question. So to not be too confusing, I'm just gonna say if you do one, you have to do A. So let's look at the culture question. So you're gonna do in your presentation, we're gonna break you up into groups of 4, I guess, 3, 4 people. And you will, so if you're doing 1, you're going to do A. So are there similarities culturally, linguistically to Francophone people in Canada? So culturally, I mean, linguistically, politically, legally, agriculturally, musically, culinarily, what is similar and what is different? Okay. What do you guys think right off the top of your head? Do you think that in Louisiana, we have similarities in any of those domains with Canada? Just if you had to say, if you had to pick a side, what would you say? Yeah, I mean, linguistically, right? We speak English, they speak English. We speak French somewhat, they speak French. But what about the rest of it? Their political system is different than ours. Their agriculture is different than at least South Louisiana. Their legal system is different. Their music is different. So there's a lot of difference, even though you kind of go to Canada and you kind of feel like, oh, it's not that different. You don't feel like, oh my God, I don't know where I am. Like it's this whole foreign thing. When you go to some countries, it's very, you feel like you're in a really, like, I don't know what's going on in Canada. You don't feel like that, but yet it's not American. It's not South Louisiana culture. Okay, so now I'm throwing in the Caribbean because I would argue, this is my bias, that Louisiana has a lot more to do with the Caribbean than with Canada. And so just like throwing it out there. So again, let me just remind you, if you're doing 2, you're gonna have to also do B. So what about the Caribbean? So this is not a class in the Caribbean, but you can't really talk about North American French, and you definitely can't talk about Louisiana without also understanding the Caribbean. So just looking at those names like Pointe-à-Pitre, which is the capital of this little teeny island in what's called the Lesser Antilles. Does that look familiar, Pointe-à-Pitre? Like every other little town down the bayou is a pointe. Have you seen towns that are called Pointe? Pointe-à-la-Hache. There's a town, is anybody from Cutoff? No. There's a town called Pointe-à-Saucisse, which just, when I learned that, I was like, now I've heard it all. And so for me, Louisiana is like a foreign country where like, I don't know what's going on. There is a place here called Sausage Point. Pointe, so like all these points, or Verret Plaisance, something Brûlé. I mean, where are we? Does that sound familiar? Have you seen, do you know any Verrets? Anybody named Verret? Like every other class probably has a Verret. Plaisance, does that ring any bells? Do you know anybody with the last name Plaisance? Like probably every 3rd class there's a Plaisance. Brûlé, there's Brûlé. Do you know what Brûlé means? What is it, a Brûlé? Have you seen towns that are called blah, 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 or there's a Guillaume Brûlé Road, I think, in Thibodaux. So what does that mean, Brûlé? Creme brulee, the dessert. Okay, so brulee means burnt. So guess what they're burning in the brulee? the sugarcane.
Mm.
And guess what they're growing in the Caribbean, just like in Louisiana?
Oh,
Sugarcane. There's the word trash comes from what in Louisiana people call bagasse. Does anybody not know what bagasse is? Bagasse is this, so Louisianans, what is bagasse? How to describe it? It's something you know, but you can't define.
Like the waste from the sugarcane process, or
Yeah, it's the trash. It's the
Wow.
waste from the sugarcane process. And so, you know, yeah, bagasse is another word that in the Caribbean, everyone would know what that is. But in Canada, would anyone know what that is? They don't know bagasse because it's the waste from the sugarcane process. Okay, so, but, which isn't to say that we are not related to Canada, because let's go on to question C, which is if you're going to do C, you are going to do 3. So 3 and C go together. The place names in Quebec are really familiar. So in Quebec, there's a Terrebonne, there's an Iberville, there's Bienvilles, there's Rue de Ursulines, which is the Ursulines. Do we actually have a lot in common with Quebec, even though in all of these other things politically, Quebec is socialist and very to the left. They're very committed to the language. Agriculturally, you know, Quebec is where they're making, I think we're gonna go to the sugar shack in Quebec, making maple syrup. Their agriculture is northern agriculture. Quebec also has a very strong music scene. So is it similar or is it different? And so if you do Quebec, then that means you're gonna do 3. And then finally, so when we talk about New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, that's Acadia. So that is where the Acadians originally landed on this peninsula of Nova Scotia, which sort of hangs like this floppy thing flopping off the edge of the continent south of Maine. And it's because the French landed there, and so did Basque people in the 17th century, which is the beginning of the colonial exploration of the New World. Okay, so the French are up there in Nova Scotia before the English are in Jamestown, before the Pilgrims have Thanksgiving. There's these French people called Canadians. Called Acadians, not Canadians. Nobody's really sure why Acadia. So Acadia has a couple of different like theories, and this is what I mean. Like, let's not get too caught up in like, what is the origin? What is Acadian? It might be Micmac. It might be a native word, l'Acadie. That's how you say it in French. Or it might be, there's this notion of Arcadian, which are like the heavenly fields in a Greek mythological sense. No one's sure why it got called Acadia. And sure enough, many of you do have Acadian heritage. And sure enough, lots of Louisianans love to go to Acadie. Like, there's a whole like return to Acadie that has been done over the course of the 20th century. And sure enough, Nova Scotians like to come to Louisiana. Okay, so now we're gonna go over to this Google Doc. So I want everybody to go to the Google Doc. So I invited you to it, and if I didn't, let me know. Or if you don't know how to get there, you should have gotten an email that invited you. So does that ring any bells with anybody? Noticing that I sent you an email to go to the Google Doc? Or if you just go to your Google Doc, yeah. So if you can't get there, let me know, and I'm gonna share that. Boom, 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 boom. Got it. Are you seeing the Google Doc? Cool. All right. So so I've never done this before, and we'll see how it works. I'm gonna say just sign up. So I group them like this. If you're doing one, you're doing A. If you are interested in this group, if you're doing two, banning of language, this is sort of the outlier group because it's about the Caribbean. The class isn't so much about the Caribbean, but you really like the Caribbean is super important to understand Louisiana. So if you, and then the language question. So if you're doing the language question, what other languages were banned? Then you're doing B, which is the Caribbean stuff. And if you are interested in, this is more like, well, okay, so the Quebecois are they're the linguistically successful ones at really making their society in French. So why don't we identify with the Quebecois more? Like everyone's pretty sure that they have Acadian, that we're Cajun, and when that'll become clearer later on, like what the Cajun Acadian thing is all about. So basically, this is the Quebecois, if you're interested in Quebec. And then the last grouping is the more granular, like what is language all about in Louisiana? And then what is this connection between Acadia, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick? So if you could just please put your names where in the group that you are going to be in, like underneath. Yeah, that's awesome. Like just like Mason did. Have you done this in other classes? Do you group Google Docs? Oh, good. Okay, cool. Is there any group that didn't get anybody? Nope, it looks like everybody's divided up. And am I right that it's about 4 or 5 people? And so some people hate group work. I find that the good students often don't like group work because, oh, so there's one group. Only one person in French language, Creole, Louisiana. Everybody else has signed up. All right, let me just see here really quick. Is anybody absent today? All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say somebody from the first group has to go down to the last group because there's too many of you guys up there in was French actually banned. Thank you. And then let me see if that does that. Okay, so it's just Mason and Catherine in that last group. Nobody else really wants to learn about Louisiana French. This is the one where you'll actually sort of be dealing with the language. Nope. All right. So be it. Okay, so as I was saying, I know that a lot of students hate group work. Let me just tell you, in this world, you're gonna have to do it all the time. You have to work with other people. It's just the way it is. All right. Did any of you guys happen to know if anyone's absent? There was one absent person.
I
They're
know
going-
Connor.
We're both absent.
Who?
Yeah.
Amanda and Connor.
They're going in, they're going in the language group. Perfect. Okay, so let me just put that down there. Amanda and Connor. I think Connor did tell me he couldn't come to class. Okay. All right, Amanda and Connor. Okay. So there's now 4 people. Okay, so I'm just gonna put you, Mason, down there with everybody else. Barnaby. Okay, all right, we're going to watch some videos. It was the original speaker who wasn't able to make it, Dr. Christophe Landry, and he's talking about Louisiana and identity. And so he is a historian. He got his degree from the University of Sussex in England. And he's from Louisiana originally, he's from New Iberia. And he's one of the people who's been, in terms of the recent revitalization, he's relatively young. You guys are like, this is a 40-year-old guy, but he's relatively young. He speaks both Louisiana French and Creole French, and he's most active in Louisiana Creole, also known as Corrievini. And so he has, I think, one of the most interesting and accurate understandings of language and identity. With this said, if Christophe was here, I would say this, he knows it. He's a controversial figure in many ways, because for him and largely for me, Louisiana's identity, I break it up into, there's Creole, and then there is a more anglicized notion of identity that is expressed by saying it's French or it's Cajun. So we're going to watch 4 short videos. And what I'd like you to do is take notes, because he's going to come on the 22nd and he'll do a little talk on the 22nd. But I would like you to ask questions, and don't feel like, you can ask him whatever you want. You can dispute. He loves an argument. And so feel free to, so please take notes and be ready to share whatever you would like with him and to have questions for him in 2 weeks. All right, so there's 4 of these videos, and then we're going to go on to the awakening.
Happy Saturday, folks.
Can you hear him? Is he loud enough? Yep.
Bon samedi. Tout quelque chose magnifique. Everything going well? Most people are not on social media all that much on the weekends. So hopefully you guys will be able to catch up next week when you start obsessing over social media again. So anyway, so I've been noticing an uptick in social media posts about Louisiana languages and identity. And I thought I would share my perspective on these things. So you guys probably know I'm a historian, have a PhD in history, American history. I'm a specialist of Louisiana. And I've been doing linguistic work for almost 20 years now, both in language restoration, but also resource development, teaching languages, and I'm also a genealogist. So all these things are interwoven because a community is, it's sort of like, if you look at a shirt, for example, there's fabric, right? And so communities have these threads that bind them. And for me, it's always been the languages that they speak, location, and genealogy, who they're marrying, right? And so all these things are really, really crucial in defining communities as distinct from others. And so naturally you get identities that are distinct as well, to make a distinction between them and between others. So I've been at this for a very long time, right? So I think I know a thing or two about it. So the uptick, I would say, started in the past couple years. Definitely, there are two catalysts. The first is Nathan Robley's new documentary called Finding Cajun. Came out in 2018, but really people are starting to see it now. And it's available on Amazon Prime, Finding Cajun. It's also being shown in Louisiana on LPB. I'm not sure to what extent it's being repeated on LPB, but I think it's had 2 showings already in the past week or 2. And so lots of people have been seeing that and commenting about that, both good and bad and neutral. And then when I participated in 2 games on Ecolinguist's YouTube channel last year, one I hosted a game in Kurivini, and then the other I was a participant, not the host, and I was speaking in French in that one. And so the world got to see, this a Louisiana Creole actually speaking these languages, probably youngish for the first time. And so there's lots of buzz about both of those languages. So language and identity are really complicated in Louisiana. It's a complication that's not always been
The video is being covered.
present, but it's complicated since the 60s, 50s, 60s.
What?
Can't see. It's being covered by like a gray block again.
All right, let me try. Always tell me, because we just don't know. I'm sitting here seeing everything. I wonder if it's because I've tried to log on to Zoom on another platform to see what the chat was. Can you see it now?
1950s and 60s.
Yeah.
For very specific reasons that were nationally rooted and then impacted local communities. And so people will identify their languages in Louisiana based on how they self-identify racially and also ethnically, not by the name of the language, not by what the language is. And so Cajuns in Louisiana who are white identified will say that they speak Cajun when probably 50% of them speak Kurivini. And the same thing is true for Creoles. You'll have lots of Creoles in Louisiana who can identify racially as white, mixed race, or Black, who will say that the language they speak is Creole, when in fact it's French. And so this is really confusing for a lot of people. It's definitely confusing for people who don't speak those languages and who are not academics. And it takes academics a while to decipher it all. If the academic speaks French, then it's easier. Or if they speak Kurivini, it's even easier to distinguish what language the Creole and the Cajun are actually speaking. Are they speaking French or are they speaking Kurivini? And if the academic doesn't speak either of those languages, I mean, it takes forever, and they're subject to misinterpretation until this academic understands the linguistic landscape. There's some literature about this nomenclature issue in Louisiana. By the way, I think to my knowledge, it's the only place, one of the only places in the world, where you have this nomenclature issue.
Okay, so let's go on to episode 2. It just sort of, I don't know, I thought it went on further. Let me see what's going on there. This class is brought to you by, sorry guys. I'm so sorry, hold on, I don't even see where. I have to find the window again, sorry. That's. Okay, sorry, 1 second. We're gonna go on to the next one because that just sort of cut off there. 1 second. Okay, episode 2. And I'm sorry that there's ads, so. And I'll share it with you in 1 sec.
Processing power. You can add videos to it, graphics, and
As for identity is concerned, there is there have always been shifts in every community, right? I mean, communities, cultures, people are always evolving, always changing. And so, you know, identity is part of that and is always changing as well. And so at a very simplistic level, I can explain this to you this way. So everyone who was Roman Catholic, born in Louisiana, and a speaker of a Romance language up until the 1950s, 60s, 70s even, self-identified as Creole. It was a Latin identity in Louisiana.
So I just want you to sort of take note there.
And ancestry.
So people sometimes get their knickers in a twist, like, I don't understand Creole, but like, that's all it is. Roman Catholic, born in Louisiana, and had parents who spoke French or Spanish or Creole. So that's all Creole means.
And we manage research, genealogical historical research. And literally I work with original records every single day. I was looking around, but I have more calligraphy and art type stuff around here at the moment, so I can't show you. But so I'm coming from someone who who's in the industry, who works with original records all the time. We find slaves who are identified as Creole. We find, and among those slaves, we see Nègre Creole, Black Creole. We see Mulat Creole, Mulatto Creole. We see Grif Creole. We see Catron Creole. We see all these different slaves with different phenotypes and different genealogies who are identified as slaves, Creoles, from the colonial period right through 1865. We also see records that name people of only European descent as Creole. Starting like Robert Talon, whose parents were from Quebec. Starting way back in the 17th century, going all the way through, you know, the 1960s, 1970s. So for all these people who are racializing Creole, this stuff happens in English. This stuff happens in English. And it starts to happen in the 19th century, especially after the Louisiana Purchase or abandonment or sale, however you want to identify that event, starts there, and it really starts to pick up. Racializing Creole starts to pick up in the 1860s, and so during the Civil War and after the Civil War, during Reconstruction in New Orleans. And so the reason why this starts to happen in New Orleans during that time period is because New Orleans was and is a city. It was the second most important port in the United States after the Purchase. And it was also the domestic trade hub for the South, internal trade. So it was an important business center. English was very important early on in New Orleans in terms of business, economy, trade, money, right? And so you have this situation where Americans come into Louisiana, a place that has a very different social structure than in the Eastern Seaboard and also in the South. And so race is the most important element there. Figuring out who's white, who's black, was important for Americans, right? And so the identity starts to become racialized because of that. So you get Creoles who are now trying to distinguish themselves from people of color because they wanted a seat at the table, the white table. And so you do get like Creoles like Charles Gaillardet, Alfred Massier, who were prolific in terms of intellectual thought during the 19th century and from New Orleans. And they start to talk about, you know, the fact that Creoles are only people of European descent. And no one of African descent is Creole. But at the exact same time, you can pull up like successions in courthouses throughout Louisiana. You can pull out newspapers at the exact same moment in Louisiana in French and in English, where you have slaves that are being called American slaves and Creole slaves. And so that was a political move. Again, they wanted a seat at the table, and so they felt that it was important to remove people of color from their shared identity so that they could have a seat at the table. And then in the Reconstruction era, you get a bunch of Creoles who had formerly been free people of color, who self-identified as Creole, and they start saying that in order to be Creole, you had to be a mixed European, African descent. And eventually during that time, the quote unquote white Creoles, as they became known, abandoned the identity, and it's left with people of color, mixed and black. And so you get that group during the Reconstruction era in New Orleans who start forcefully identifying as Creole publicly, still, despite the fact that the Civil War had ended a division in society between free people and enslaved people. And so Creole in New Orleans at that time starts to have this meaning of mixed race.
So now we're going to go on to the third one. And that's probably the meaning that you've heard of Creole, right? Like, does that ring a bell with everybody? That Creole is, hold on. Oh God, these ads. Okay. I think it's because I keep putting it on the share the screen on the exit. All right. So does that ring a bell with everybody? The idea that Creoles are a mixed race people? Yep. Light-skinned people from New Orleans. Yeah. So next he's going to talk about the people who are not necessarily light-skinned people, who are Creoles. So they're darker skinned people, and that they get left out of it too. So so it's kind of complicated. On the one hand, there were people who said Creoles are white. They are white, pure white. And the reason where the stakes were high, you had a higher place in society. There were also people who were mixed, and they hung on to that identity as Creole, that we are from the French speaking background, we are Catholic, and our parents and grandparents were born here, and there's some European ancestor way back, so we are Creoles. Then there's this third group of people who are also Creoles because they have ancestors who also spoke French. They were in a Catholic milieu. Sometimes their culture went in different directions, becoming more Protestant, or they were simply not embraced for their phenotype, for their skin color. So the next, I think this is where Dr. Landry is sort of making a brand new point about who gets left out of these Louisiana French identities. Okay, so the next one is what he calls muted Creoles. And sadly, we're gonna have to listen to the new map for a second.
Pretty quickly, I lost 10 pounds,
All right, that's
which to me was huge. I hadn't seen the scale move in so long.
Skip and thank you. There we go.
Hey folks, so in the previous episode, we left off discussing how Creole identity in New Orleans became associated with mixed raceness. And we discussed why that happened. It was basically because the white Creoles abandoned Creole identity in exchange for American identity and French identity to distance themselves from their brethren of color, leaving the only people self-identifying publicly as Louisiana Creole in New Orleans as people of African descent to some degree, whether mixed or not. But there's another division that happens after white Creoles abandon Creole identity. And this is where dark complected Creoles who quote unquote look black get shoved out of Creole identity in New Orleans. I need to stress in New Orleans because this process is completely different outside of New Orleans. New Orleans is a different ballgame altogether. And so basically what happens is when white Creoles abandon Creole identity, leaving the identity, public identity with people of color, the people of color who latched on to Creole identity the most publicly in New Orleans during Reconstruction and early Jim Crow were Louisiana Creoles who were formerly free people of color before the Civil War. So that means that they were not slaves. A lot of them had been born free. Some of them had been emancipated before the Civil War. Most of them were of mixed African and European origins. To a smaller extent, you had some who had Native American origins. And so this idea that Creole means mixed race comes into being in New Orleans at this point. And because these particular Creoles latched onto Creole identity the most during Reconstruction and Jim Crow, it caused another division, bifurcation in Creolite in New Orleans by shoving out all the Louisiana Creoles who phenotypically look black. So that means dark brown complected, coarse hair, Louisiana Creoles who also did not have French surnames, and Louisiana Creoles who, importantly, lived downtown or who didn't live in the 7th Ward. This is really important in understanding the stickiness of Creole identity in New Orleans today, because when most people think of Creole identity in New Orleans, you think of the Charbonnets, you think of the Morials, you think of, light complexioned people with ambiguous features, certain surnames who come out of the 7th Ward or something like that. When in fact, you still had these muted Creoles, as I came to refer to them, who still continue to practice Creole culture, who still continue to identify as Louisiana Creoles, but who get shoved uptown, which is like the Anglophone, the American quarters of New Orleans. Downtown is the French, the Latin side, the Creole side. And so the muted Creoles get shoved out of the Creole nucleus in New Orleans and live among Americans. They apostatize, they become Protestants, Methodists, Baptists, Episcopalians, some of them, and on and on and on. But these muted Creoles still continue to identify as Louisiana Creole, but not publicly, because the public face had to be Black or African American because of where they were living in New Orleans and because of the politics of identity, and especially in the context of Jim Crow in New Orleans. In my opinion, muted Creoles, or first of all, they're not discussed in academia at all. They are not discussed publicly at all either. New Orleans is also a very sticky place in terms of identity because as it pertains to Creole, people of color who latched on to Creole in New Orleans by shoving out all the Louisiana Creoles who phenotypically look black. You still had these muted Creoles, as I came to refer to them, who still continue to practice Creole culture, who still continue to identify as Louisiana Creoles, but who get shoved uptown, which is like the Anglophone, the American quarters of New Orleans. Downtown is the French, the Latin side, the Creole side. But these muted Creoles still continue to identify as Louisiana Creole, but not publicly, because the public face had to be Black or African American because of where they were living in New Orleans and because of the politics of identity, and especially in the context of Jim Crow in New Orleans. Dividing communities, dividing Louisiana Creoles. And so any association, relationship with people of African descent could land you, beaten in the streets, ostracized by white society, and on and on and on. So what happens is among white Creoles, you have some that began to distance themselves altogether with Créolité in exchange for American, speaking English, anglicizing their names, marrying Anglophones, Americans. So in all of these episodes, when I mention American or African American, I'm talking about people who are of Anglophone descent and Protestant. This is how Louisiana Creoles in our own languages refer to Americans, Américain. That is different from American in the nationality sense, because of course all Louisiana Creoles are nationally American, right? Have American passports and things like that. But it's an ethnic distinction that's made here in the episodes. And so the other white Creoles, they start to switch Creole with French, because of course French, when you talk about French, you think about Europe. And so Europeans are white. And so if you exchange your Creole identity for French, then it means that you're implying or even explicitly stating that you are white or of European descent. And so this is what happens with some Louisiana Creoles in New Orleans. They established these organizations like Latini Louisianais that was promoting continued Creole identity among white Creoles, not among Creoles of color, among white Creoles, and also continued speaking of French. And these became markers for whiteness, but a different type of whiteness, not Anglo whiteness, but Latin whiteness, French. And so these organizations like Latini Louisianais sent out, members throughout South Louisiana during the 19-teens, 1920s, who were in places like Abbeville, New Iberia, St. Martinville, Opelousas, and so on and so forth, who were trying to encourage other white Creoles, right, to continue speaking French and also to embrace this French public identity as opposed to Creole. Didn't work too well. It didn't work too well outside of New Orleans, because a lot of people still spoke these languages. So they were preaching to the choir, right? Most people, in fact, who were Creoles outside of New Orleans still spoke Louisiana French or French in some form, Kourivini, or Spanish. And so...
Okay. I'm gonna stop him for a sec. All right, so we're gonna watch one more of Christoph's videos, and then we're gonna take a little break. Does that feel about right to take a break around 5:45? So 5:45 or 6 every day, we'll take a break. And believe you me, I don't like sitting still for 3 hours either. And the technology's bad. Let's see. So this is the last one for Christoph. And let me skip the ads. And this one is also a little long, so I might cut him short.
So in the previous two episodes, we talked about how the Louisiana Creole community frayed between 1803 and 1903. The fraying happened due to racialization. It starts early on after Louisiana becomes an American territory and then state. We find in the antebellum period, Louisiana Creoles of European descent began to say that in order to be Creole, you had to be a person of only European descent. And so they're excluding Louisiana Creoles of color, despite the fact that everyone in Louisiana and beyond were referring to people of color as Louisiana Creoles at the exact same time. After the Civil War, these Louisiana Creoles, who white identified Louisiana Creoles, abandoned Creole identity. And that leaves Creole identity in New Orleans with people of color, Louisiana Creoles of color. The ones who latch on the most to Creole identity during Reconstruction and early Jim Crow were Louisiana Creoles who previously were free before the war. So free people of color. Most of them were of mixed origins, European and African. Some of them had Native American roots as well, but the vast majority were of African and European descent. And they in turn exclude Louisiana Creoles who were dark, who were Black. Okay, so this story between 1803 and 1903 is very much a story of bifurcation, of division within Creoles due to the pressures of racialization. We talked about how when white Creoles abandoned Creole identity, some of them sided for American identity. They anglicized their names. They began speaking English. They wanted no sort of association with Creoles whatsoever, because that association meant that you probably were mixed. And if you were mixed or anyone of African descent during Jim Crow, then that means you were ostracized by larger white society in the United States at the time. You also had some Louisiana Creoles of European descent that we spoke about briefly, who began creating organizations like Latine Louisianais based in New Orleans that promoted continued speaking of French and promoted also French identity as opposed to Creole identity. Why French? Well, because French means that you're from France. France is in Europe, and so Europe means white. So you're white, but not Anglo-white. So they were still continuing to draw a distinction, ethnic distinction between Americans and between Latin people in Louisiana. Well, you had a third sort of branch from the Louisiana Creoles of European descent, who in Southwest Louisiana create yet a new identity during the exact same time, the 1920s. This identity, my friends, was called Louisiana Acadians. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, this is the same thing as Cajun. Nope, it's not. It's not the same thing as Cajun. Cajun identity comes later on in the 20th century and focuses on a sort of different narrative, but it's related to this one. This Louisiana Acadian identity comes about in the 20s through two key figures. The first is Dudley LeBlanc, who was from Vermilion Parish, so it's like southwest of Lafayette. The second was Susan Walker, who was from Opelousas, which is north of Lafayette in St. Landry Parish. Why those two? Well, Susan Walker was a booster, and boosters at the time were sort of community activists and community organizers, white. And it was an occupation that was very popular for a lot of white middle-class women at the time. Why at the time? Well, the 1920s, you probably recall, was the period when women, white women, got the right to vote, could also start to work in industries that previously barred them, men only. And so it was a period of great change. Susan Walker Susan Walker definitely harnessed the change, right? And made great use of the opportunities that were now available to her. And she became this really, really well-known booster, both on the national level, state level, as well as regionally. So she had contacts and influence at all three of these levels. Dudley LeBlanc was a businessman and later becomes a politician. He was of Acadian descent. Susan Walker was not. Dudley LeBlanc was of Acadian descent. And what he does is he reminds Americans of the epic poem Evangeline that Longfellow wrote and published in the 1840s. Americans loved it. It was wildly popular. Wildly popular because it didn't present Americans in a sort of negative light. It was a story of how these Acadians got separated by the British, not by Americans, by the British, those evil Brits. And then some of them wind up in Louisiana, and in the Louisiana bayous in prairies, there Acadians could prosper. Prosper why? Because of Americans. Also, it was a story of whiteness, how whiteness didn't only come in the Anglo form, it also came in the Latin form, French form. Well, at the exact same time, in the 1920s in the United States, because of all the social change, you also had racial issues that were happening as a result of World War I, when you had the soldiers of color who were working, soldiers who were white left to Europe and replaced by people of color in their jobs. They get back and there's civil strife throughout the country at this time, and on and on and on. So you had this great social change that was happening in the 1920s in the United States. And lots of people who were, let's say, conservative felt that modernity was taking over and everything was speeding up, everything was moving so fast, people couldn't concentrate on, it was really an issue of keeping hold of a narrative and power. Well, all this stuff was changing during the 1920s. And so the Acadian story is reintroduced through Dudley LeBlanc because it's a story that's quintessentially of people who were poor, but hardworking, white, and despite the odds, still survived, still did well. I mean, for anyone who was white, middle class, conservative, an influencer at the time, really, really compelling story to bring back in the forefront because they're worrying about women wearing, flappers and all of this stuff and going to nightclubs and drinking and having freedom and all of this stuff. Well, the Acadian story with the women and, their 18th century I'm saying costumes because, well, Susan Walker will introduce these costumes, but in their 18th century dress, at the loom, doing household stuff, all these things that men who were not progressive at the time wanted women to still be doing in the United States. So the Acadian story hits home. And Dudley LeBlanc was smart in recognizing this. And Susan Walker, what she then did was, she took the Acadian story from Longfellow, right? So remember, the Acadian deportation is real. Acadians existed, Acadians still exist. But the poem itself was fictional. So Susan, through her influence and contacts throughout the country, state, and region, takes this Acadian story and personifies it in real people. So she creates this troupe of Acadian girls who mostly were not of Acadian descent. Most of them were Anglo-Americans, a lot from North Louisiana, some from Central Louisiana. It was kind of sort of like a pageant deal where you had to interview for the position to be in the troupe. And then Walker finds not uniforms, they were kind of uniforms because it was a job, but she finds these costumes in Texas and starts to parade this idea around that these costumes were real, authentic Acadian dresses that women wore in the 18th century in the Canadian Maritimes. And so the Acadian girls, her troops, start to wear these costumes, and they had bonnets and the apron and wooden shoes and all of this stuff. It looked very, for anyone who's around today, you see it and you think, okay, well, that's costumey, because it was a costume. But at the time, thinking like people back then with the anxieties of modernity, they probably welcomed this a very lot. So much so that the Evangeline girls with Susan Walker went to the White House. They made a quilt for the President of the United States. They met the First Lady at the time. And so it was popular. It was really popular. This movement sort of is the forerunner of the later Cajun movement, which I'm going to talk about in a different episode, but it's the forerunner of the Cajun movement because the later Cajun movement also will dip and dabble with Longfellow's poem. Evangeline becomes central in Acadian identity. Evangeline is on everything in Louisiana today. There's Evangeline made bread. In Lafayette, there's the Evangeline Downs, there's the Evangeline Thruway, and on and on and on. So Evangeline through the Acadian movement and then the Cajun movement becomes a central figure. But the question you should probably be asking yourself is, if Evangeline was not a true story, if it was a poem that was fictional, and Evangeline didn't really exist, why are so many people in Louisiana accepting Evangeline as real and personifying her and also commodifying her? That is the central question we'll talk about in the next episode.
Okay, guys, so that was a lot to follow. And so let me turn that off. Boop. Okay, there we go. Get out of the view. Exit full screen. Okay. So there's a couple things I just want to ask you really quickly. Everyone knows this Evangeline phenomenon, right? Evangeline bread. Yeah, okay. Does everyone know the poem? I am not going to make you read this long epic poem from 1845, but it was written by Wordsworth, Longfellow, who's a poet from New England, and we'll learn later what the Acadian story is. And she's a fictive character that this guy from New England came up with. So there's all these racial and language, and what I like is that he brings in this other angle that it really served certain interests, like these girls that were dressed up in these 18th century clothing right when feminism is born. So let's take 15 minutes and come back, and we're going to see how this all ties in with the awakening. Okay, so feel free to turn off your camera, to log out. I'm just going to mute myself and turn off my camera, and I will see you in 15. Okay, I see some of you coming back. So that should work. It's not going to be, it gets pretty old after an hour and a half of sitting there. But we'll take breaks and carry on. So I'm kind of surprised that nobody has read The Awakening, because in the past, I'd say in the past 5-10 years, I've been at Nichols 15 years, and I've definitely had students who are like, yeah, we had to read The Awakening. So none of you had read this book.
I've read it. I've read it.
Catherine, you said you read it. Who else read it?
I read it in high school, and I'm required to read it for my American Lit 2 class this semester, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, so that's good. I just want to relate that I read it also in an American literature class when I was 19. I had no effing idea what was going on. I was like, what? Creoles? Louisiana, Grand Isle? Like, this was outer space to me. I didn't even understand that this was America. It was that foreign. I liked it, but in the 19th century language also was confusing to me. Like, I just found, but now I find it to be not a particularly hard book. It was hard when I was a little bit like, I was maybe a freshman or so when I read it. And the Louisiana context went like over my head, but I did understand the feminist element. So I understood that women didn't publish books. It was a miracle to get a book published if you're a woman in 1899. How do you think that this book did? Big success? A woman writer, 1899, about Louisiana. Wah, wah. Yeah, she was sort of rediscovered in the 1960s and the 70s. Why then?
The women's movement started.
Women's movement starts, exactly. So so let's just talk a little bit about who Kate Chopin was. She was actually Irish and French from Missouri, and I will never out who this was, but it was a Nichols person who said to me, somebody from Missouri was telling me all about how they're just like us and they speak French and they have French background. And I was like, what? We're Cajuns. We have nothing to do with them. But actually, guess what? St. Louis, Missouri. There is still French to this day spoken in Missouri. Not much, but there is a dialect that's similar to the Louisiana dialect that is spoken in Missouri. So Kate Chopin was from this Irish and French background, meaning what religious group would she be from, most likely?
Catholic.
Catholic. So she's a Catholic young woman in Missouri. She was from an upper middle class background, and she marries this guy. I always want to say Léonce Pontellier, but no, Oscar Chopin. So Oscar Chopin is a Louisianan, and he's from North Louisiana in a sense. And this is another thing that we always hear. Above I-10, what is above I-10, guys? It's all
Not real Louisiana.
not real
Like-
Louisiana. Exactly. So let me just say, I have been to Natchitoches. I would have loved to have gone and seen the Chopin house. It burnt down. There's a whole thing with plantations burning down. It had been on the historic register. It burnt. She's from a town called Cloutierville. Sounds like Louisiana to me. Cloutierville. It's probably pronounced Cloutierville. And so, yeah, North Louisiana has its pockets of what we consider in South Louisiana. She also lived in New Orleans. So the character Edna Pontellier and the Pontelliers, they live on Esplanade Avenue. And this was probably something that you didn't understand exactly from Dr. Landry's identity discussion about downtown Louisiana and uptown Louisiana. So, I mean, uptown New Orleans. So I know I have some New Orleanians in this class, but you are from Lakeview, right? Who's from New Orleans? And well, am I right that it's Lakeview? Where are you from?
West Bank.
The West Bank. Okay. That's a whole nother problem. So yeah, of course, the West Bank is also part of New Orleans, but like East Bank people are like, it's not even New Orleans. It is. But like the division I make on the East Bank being East Bank centric is uptown, downtown. And downtown was the Creole neighborhood. And so Edna lives on Esplanade Avenue, and Esplanade Avenue is one of the streets that borders the French Quarter, and it's where the Creoles lived. So basically this woman from in the story from Kentucky marries into a Creole family in New Orleans, the Pontelliers. There's another little curiosity that is just, it shows like the imagination of Kate Chopin. So she writes about the Cheniere Caminada. And since I did see somebody who knew way down the bayou in Lafourche Parish, who was that person? Do you know where the Cheniere Caminada is, whoever that was? It was the person who recognized when I said Pointe à Saucisse.
Yeah, I've never been to Cheniere though, but I know kind of where
It's not there. You can't go there.
Yeah, it's nothing there though.
Right, so it
Dr.
used
Du-
to be there. Go
Dr.
ahead.
Duce does do trips there every now and then though, to where it
Yeah.
was.
His family's from there. So there was a whole little town there. Yeah, Dr. Duce has a sort of obsession with the Cheniere Caminada. And so oftentimes we are obsessed with things that ain't there no more. It got knocked off the map in a horrible hurricane that really was devastating. I mean, it was not a Katrina, but it was up there. It was a Betsy. So yeah, so I find that very interesting. And she writes about who lives in the Cheniere Caminada. Or if you want to be like, you know, me and say Cheniere Caminada. How do you guys pronounce it in when you're local? Cheniere? So who lived there in the book? She takes a little trip. Edna takes a little trip there with her crush Robert, and they go to the Cheniere, and there's Acadians. So just like Christophe was saying, this. So the book was written in the 1890s. She makes up this place that had been wiped off the map. She's like, people still live there. It's supposed to be contemporary, and she goes to this Acadian woman's house, and notice it's not a Cajun, it's not a Acadian, it's just the Acadian lady's house who she goes to and she takes a nap. So one of the things that if you just bring, why I start with the awakening, it's partially because it starts in Lafourche. Well, Grand Isle today is actually not Lafourche Parish, but it should be. Thank you. Do you know what Grand Isle, what parish it belongs to? It strangely belongs to Jefferson Parish, and there's some like old, you know, like Jeff Parish. Well, Jeff Parish, sneaky, they want the beach, right? But it should be Lafourche Parish. So notice, even though I mean, I have a ton of respect for Dr. Landry's, he's the most knowledgeable person I know about Louisiana languages, and I think he's right about everything, but there is this lack of discussion about where. He talks about New Orleans, he talks about where else. And so in what we just watched, where else was he discussing? This whole Evangeline thing took place where?
The New Iberia, kind of Lafayette area.
Exactly. So, so where's Lafourche and Terrebonne and all that? Because surely these are not like their own people. I feel like that the region that Nichols is in, do you notice how UL markets itself with a fleur-de-lis, and what is their team?
Raging Cajuns.
Raging Cajuns. It's like, it's so good, right? And so the way somebody I know from that side of Louisiana, they said, you know what's so dumb? Everybody is really Acadian in Lafourche, but we're pretending to be over in Lafayette. And I was like, yeah, there's some truth to that. So so I like The Awakening because it starts in, I like it because it starts in Lafourche, even though technically speaking, Grand Isle's Jeff Parish. So it's famous not for any of this. It's famous for what? Why do you think this book gets a lot of attention to this day? Like you're reading it, somebody's reading it this semester.
Wasn't it sort of one of like the first books that people kind of cite as like early feminist literature?
It's a okay, so there's a test called the Bechdel test. It's
Yeah.
conversation, you know about this? Okay, so there's conversations between women. It's amazing. There's all these women friendships. The Bechdel test is, it turns out that when movies, when media and books use women speaking with each other, it doesn't sell poorly, it sells better. It's a good thing when there's women talking to each other. And so there's these friendships, and there's also a whole male intrigue, but the male element is sort of problematic. So I'm going to ask you guys to pick your numbers, and we're going to go back to the Google Doc and just put the numbers. So pick your questions. Let me go back to the Google Doc. So if you don't know where that is, it's on Moodle, the questions, and I kind of asked you and sent it to you many times. So back to the Google Doc, and where's my little awakening part? And we're just going to pick the questions. So pick the numbers, and let me share that with you of the questions. And if were all the questions that I'm asking, are they pretty clear to you? You know what I'm asking for? Just questions to talk about what is important in the novel. So if you see that somebody else put the same number, don't put the number because we already have it. See what I mean? And then we're going to, by process of elimination, or don't worry about it. Just put your numbers. That's, I could see confusion when I said that. And you can put your name next to them. That'll be helpful. Not so much like I'm keeping track of who you are, but like I just want to start to figure out who you are. You know, it would be probably helpful if you cut and pasted the whole question. Let's just do it like that. Okay, so I see that 4 showed up twice. Four showed up 3 times. So we're definitely going to talk about 4. Let's just give this a couple more minutes because I don't see everyone. Did one show up anywhere? Yeah, okay. One showed up again. 3 1s, 4 1s, couple of 4s. Oh, I was missing that. There was all this down here too. Okay, so we're gonna do 1 and 4 for sure. Everyone wants 4. I didn't even think that was that great of a question. 1. So, and 4. And can you guys help me and tell me what else is repeated?
Ten is repeated a lot, I think.
Okay, 10. That's what I expected. Let's just do 1 more. Oh, the children. Yeah, the children are important. Who are the children? Remember the children. Okay, so and you can check me if I'm off on it, skipping anybody. We don't have to do the children.
Number 8's repeated a lot.
Okay, yeah. Let's do 8. All right, so now I'm gonna cut and paste and make our list of questions to talk to. All right, so there's number 1. Oops, I'm gonna go back. Boop. Do number 1. Okay, and 4. The children are kind of key. All right. There's 4. And by the way, if you guys know more efficient ways of doing things, I learn a lot from when students just tell me it's better if you do it X, Y, or Z way. Number 8. Now, old Pontellier and his scheme. So I wrote and presented a paper several times on just the question of houses and where people live in The Awakening and number 10. All right, yes. Does everybody agree that she committed suicide? Okay. All right, so let's just start with number 1. What does that mean to be woke?
I think just defiant of any like norms that are in place, social norms. Defiant of that is how I describe that.
I don't think that's quite it.
So like whenever I started like first hearing people talk about woke, they meant like you're a, okay. I'm sorry, were you saying something? I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, hold on, unmute yourself.
Hi.
You were saying something, Levin, and then you got like
Yeah,
we couldn't hear you.
I think it can be taken in a lot of different meanings, and different groups will assign different meanings to, you know, being woke or waking up. But I think it's just like finding yourself apart from social norms in general, what's accepted generally, and taking yourself out of that. I think that's like a pretty consistent definition from what I know it to be anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who else wants to attack that?
Yeah, so when I first started hearing about it, like it was just sort of a word meaning like you're conscious about social issues and things like that. So you're like someone who is, you know, kind of in touch with like the social issues that are prevalent. But I feel like now it kind of has more of like a cynical meaning. Like if someone calls you woke, like it's attached more with like performative activism and things like that, where you might, you know, pretend to care about certain social issues just to kind of get the social status of being like an activist, but you don't really care about it.
I think there has been a switch, like the defiant of social norms element, like the idea of being woke is that you are not being what?
Mindlessly asleep or a sheep or something like that.
Yeah. So like it is sort of what you said, Levin. But yeah, definitely to be woke has become almost ironic, like to call somebody else, you're so woke, you know? But what is it specifically referring to? What is someone who's woke, what are they valuing, or what are they defying?
I think it varies per context. What in particular are you talking about?
I think you're like aware of like social issues and prejudices and stuff, and you make like a conscious effort to like combat that with your actions.
Yeah, there is that layer though, that is it Ridge, like that it's almost like if you ever said I'm so woke or someone called you woke, it'd be like, yeah, it means kind of that you're not really doing
Yeah,
what
it
you're
kind of has like a
saying.
cynical meaning now, where it's sort
Yeah.
of almost like a jab that you can throw at people about it.
It sounds more like it's become a contested terms these days, where it's kind of just lost the original meaning that it did already have.
So what do you
The
think?
idea, I want to talk, like if the idea is that it's good, the like waking up the rebellion against these societal norms or what's expected of you, and those ideas starting to become the general norms, like you're generally supposed to be like woke, questioning the norms, and where does that leave us then if that's supposed to be the norm? This woke culture becomes a norm.
Yeah, I think not so much your generation, but like the millennials are sometimes accused of being like super self-aware to the point where, you know, they're just like sort of analyzing what they say and trying to be so inclusive and careful. And yet, does that really, that like over self-awareness, does it make you a person who is more defiant or taking action or changing anything? So do you think it's the this recent, because I really don't think it's so much like people in your age group, I think it's the people a little bit older than you, it's their language, and that's why already it sounds a little bit washed up now. Do you think that the awakening in the book is in any way, shape, or form connected to this contemporary definition?
I think so, because she's breaking the gender roles basically, and that's kind of what like being woke is. It's like breaking those societal norms and like gender roles about women having to be like a wife and a mother, and that's what she's trying to do. So basically she's like woke in it.
Yep. I think it holds up. Yep. I think that there's like an obvious connection, that she's something in her all of a sudden was like, what the am I doing? And but what is the gender role that I mean, she's not really going out there on a crazy limb. Like, what is it that she's changing or defying? It's not like she compared to today's standards where you can choose your gender or you can date whoever you want. It certainly doesn't seem like whatever she's up to is that defiant. So what are the norms that she is pushing away?
That she's
I
not
think-
really owned by her husband anymore type stuff.
Yeah, like to give up her self identity to serve her husband and children.
What would she rather be doing?
Being an artist, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Or what else?
Like doing whatever she feels like doing, really. It's just like not being controlled by everybody else.
Yep. I mean, it's hardly that crazy that we all sort of want to do what we want to do. So the last time I taught this was 2 years ago in a Louisiana Studies class. It was 200 level. And somebody, I'd never thought of Edna this way. They said she has bipolar. I was like, all right. What do you mean? And he just thought that she was flaky and going in one direction when she really wanted to go in the other direction, and that she had had children. So like, why does she just not like put on her big girl panties and be a lady who has children and has a husband? And I was like, all right. Do you think that she has mental illness? You
No.
do?
The whole time I thought that she had like depression.
I
or
don't think
something.
she's mentally ill. I don't think that. I just think she's kind of irresponsible with her choices, but definitely not ill.
I mean, did she really have choices?
She explained that one part too, how she felt like she had all these goals in her life, but then she just had to settle down and she had to like conform to how she was supposed to be. So I don't think it's her being crazy. I think she's just unfulfilled.
I don't think it's like mental illness. I think it's more that she really just, not that she didn't know what she wanted, but she just kind of kept going back and forth because when her husband was leaving, she started showing more affection to him right before he left. And then as soon as he left, she felt like she was in peace. So
But then and when she sees her children, she cries and wants to be with them. Like, I thought there was something to like, I'd never thought of Edna as mentally ill or bipolar or depressed. But then I was like, there is something, she's very inconsistent. But I also think like, I don't think she had choices. I don't think, what did women who were upper middle class, what was she supposed to be doing every day?
House chores.
Laundry, like what you see Adele doing, right? I think that's how you say it, right?
Adele?
Adele.
Yeah, what's Adele doing? They are not doing laundry and chores.
They do.
There's one moment where she's
They're
like,
entertaining. Like they're entertaining people that come to the house and things like that.
yeah, and who's doing the laundry and chores?
Servants.
And how are the servants consistently described?
Most of them are, I think they're mostly black within the story. I'm not sure.
Absolutely. There's a little girl that moves the sewing machine for Madame Lebrun. She's a little black girl because it's dangerous. It says in there, because you could hurt yourself when you couldn't have a woman getting hurt. And I'm like, it's a child. Then there's what she describes as the quadroon encumbrance. So she has a nanny. She has some nanny who's running after, and she finds, this is my favorite thing about upper class people, that they complain about the servants. Like, she doesn't have to work. Edna's not working. She is supposed to entertain who?
Other upper class business associates, people who visit the house, that sort of thing, just to like give them social status, I guess, as a
Yeah,
family.
she's supposed to maintain the social status of a upper class lady, a Creole woman in New Orleans. So notice, who are the Creoles, to like tie that back into Dr. Landry's discussion of identity? Who are the Creoles in The Awakening?
Most of them just seem to be like old French families in New Orleans, like sort of.
Racially, who are they?
Oh, I mean, the ones in here were white.
Right.
However, then there's the quadroon and the black girl, and then there's also, it's a very tiny little scene, but there's a woman that's described as a griff. And it's when Adele is having her baby, and there's this griff. Do you guys know what a griff is? Have you ever heard that? So it is a racial descriptor of somebody who is some element black and some element, so African descended and native descended, and probably also some European. So they're Creoles, but there's these different racial descriptors that there's nothing in English that could describe what a griff is. Like that word does not, we can't say a griff is this. It just does not exist in English. Which is why I say there's this French mindset of these different classes of people based on the way they look that doesn't exist in English. Okay, so I do think like the idea of her being woke, she is woke to something in herself, and that something is that there are gender roles imposed on her that she's not crazy about. All right, I'm glad that you guys picked that question because I thought they're gonna think that's silly. Okay, then this question I thought surely no one cares because, yeah, is it really like, could it happen elsewhere, this story?
I mean, probably. Aren't there a lot of like beach towns and stuff that a lot of families go on vacation to, like up north on the East Coast and everything like that? Like with Martha's Vineyard and all those places. So it probably could happen there.
Would anything be lost in the story? Like, could we just retell the awakening in a different town with different people?
Well, an important thing to think about is that South Louisiana is mostly Catholic, which is definitely more into enforcing that stereotype on women. So
Yes,
you-
the mother women. So what is it that women are supposed to be doing in the society? End of
Supposed to be-
story. They're supposed to be,
yeah, mothers and wives to raise Catholic kids.
and that is like, it is a very old concept in Latin cultures, the Roman matron. She is supposed to be having babies. That's what women were useful for. And why did families want lots of babies? What does that do for society to have large families?
Child labor.
In the day, for sure. However, go ahead.
If they have boys, they'll carry on the family name.
The family name, super important. Do you notice that there's some twins, the Farival twins? Guess where they're going?
The nun.
The nunnery, yeah. The twins. So that's kind of important. Like, you have two girls. Where are they? What are you going to do with those girls? They're going to be nuns. They're like, we're taking care of that problem right there. So like, I don't think it could be anywhere, because I do think these like details of, the importance of the Catholic big family, and this is what women are supposed to be up to. They're supposed to be making babies. But with that said, Puritan families had huge families, and they're not Catholics. So like, I'm a little torn, which is why I asked the question. Like, could it happen? I mean, maybe it could be somewhere else. What else would be on the argument of it could be anywhere? Or it has to be Louisiana.
I think also because New Orleans does have it has a lot of music in its culture, which does help inspire her to pursue that.
Yes. So as much as we're like sort of like beating up on this, like this is a constraining culture of Catholicism, what else does Catholicism celebrate?
They celebrate Mardi Gras.
Parties, for sure. You're supposed to enjoy. You're not supposed to be overly scrupulous, and there's a day that's meant for you can confess your sins. You are expected to enjoy life, but there's a great tradition of art and music that is more in this Latin culture. Did you know New Orleans is the first place to have an opera in the United States? Not in the world, in the United States. Yeah, like where else would they have an opera in the United States? No one else is enjoying anything in the United States. Have you ever heard of social aid and pleasure clubs? They're like a big thing in New Orleans. Mutual aid. I'm sure that they existed in the Bayou region at some point. Like, the mutual aid societies existed, but in New Orleans are mutual aid societies with the word pleasure. Like, so, there is this other thing. But also Edna is not really from there, right? Where is she from?
Kentucky.
She's from Kentucky. And what is she good at? She is good at something. She's okay at art, but she actually like does really well, which allows her to move out. It makes sense.
The race horses, right?
Yep. She could pick a winner somehow at the racetrack. And the racetrack, that could be anywhere. Racetracks and gambling it's very Louisianan, but it could be anywhere. So like, I think I think it would be a less interesting story without the Louisiana. If she walked out into Martha's Vineyard and drowned, I just find that the temptations aren't there like they are in New Orleans. When she does break off, do you notice like what she wants to do with her days? She wants to go have coffee in a cafe. Like who doesn't want to do that? Hang out and have good food and coffee. That's what and so like there's these alternate things that are available to her. And the curious character of Mademoiselle Wrights, like she's Mademoiselle and she's probably, middle-aged and she's living her life, right? Playing music. Okay, let's go to the next question. So yeah, this is one of my favorite parts of the book. What does Mr. Pontellier do when Edna decides to move, and why does he make up a story? Explain the scheme. So let's lay it out a little bit. Edna's moving. She goes. She's moving out of her big fancy house. And she's going to this other house, which she calls something. Do you know what she calls her little house?
The pigeon house.
The pigeon house, right. Do you know what a pigeon house is? The pigeonnier. So they're all over when you drive up and down Highway 1, you'll see them now. They're these little houses where they used to keep pigeons, and people used to eat pigeons, also known as doves. So like, it doesn't sound gross to eat a dove, but it's kind of gross to eat a pigeon, but people ate pigeons all over the place, not just in Louisiana. And they would have a little, it looks like a tiny house, and they're adorable. So there's also something in Louisiana that is called a garçonnier, sometimes called a garçonnière. Does that ring any bells? So the garçonnier or the garçonnière could be the attic, or it could be a wing off the house. And garçon means boy. So why do you think the boys get their own little space in a house? There's no equivalent of this is the girl's house. Why do boys get their own space? And I'm going to Google it really quickly and just see if it comes up as, I don't think it's a Louisiana thing. I think it's just a word, and that because Louisianans spoke French, that the garçonnière, I might be wrong, and that it'll come up as like specifically Louisianan. Bachelor's apartment. All right, now let's put in garçonnière, New Orleans, Louisiana. Okay, so that's a big plantation. They just named the whole thing the garçonnière. Let me see if I can find the image of one. Garçonnière. Okay, so that looks like that's a garçonnière right there, but it could be the attic as well. So why do the bachelors get their own little place to hang out, and there's no thing that's like, this is the girlier? You guys are stumped by this? If it's the bachelors, what is the expression like, boys will be boys? What does that actually mean?
Like they're messy, they like play rough or whatever, I guess. Like they can, they have a place just to kind of unwind or whatever by themselves and do whatever they want, kind of thing.
Totally. They could do whatever they want, right? And so there's an architectural term for like they get their space. There's no term for the girls. There's no they get their space in French or in English. There's no bachelor's apartment for a woman. Maybe a she shed, but that is in the last 20 years. Do you guys know what a she shed is? Yeah. So everyone wants a she shed. Yeah, I would like one. So she moves to the pigeonnière, the pigeon house, and birds are a thing in this book. Birds come up again and again. There's a bird circling around poor Edna as she dies. So she just decides to move because she wants a bachelor pad, right? there any other way to like interpret her desire to leave a mansion?
I think she said she wanted to live in something that like she bought with money that she earned. She didn't want to just live in something from her husband's money.
Totally. Yes. Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to interpret it. I don't think like the only thing is she wants to do what she wants to do. So there's a very famous book by a British feminist, early feminist, called A Room of One's Own. And it's about writing. Because if you do not have a room of your own, you're never going to get your writing done, because you're going to be like the garçonniere, like having fun. If you're, everyone needs a room of their own, but especially women. And why do women need their own space? I would argue more than men. And they don't technically get it very often.
Is it so they can get away from kids for a little while and kind of like just unwind?
Yep. Because like, if you're in that traditional society where women are meant to have babies, like, yeah, even though like her life is pretty good, she gets to walk down the beach with, Robert, she gets to hang out with Adele. But yeah, like I think Edna needs her own space and she does not. So we're gonna have to get back to the kids, even though we didn't choose that as a question. But yeah, so she needs her own space and she bought it with her own money, and so she's in control of it. And what does Pontellier, her husband, what does he bake up?
He says that he's redoing their house, and so she's going to stay somewhere else and won't have visitors for a while.
Yep, he publishes this in the paper. He goes so far to say the Pontellier's beautiful house. And this is where it's interesting too, because I kind of like wonder, it's this period where it's early modern. So it's probably this Victorian over the top, like heavy furniture and tons of carpets. And he's going to modernize their apartment and put in something called a snuggery, which is a little special space where couples hang out. Yeah, he comes up with an elaborate lie to hide what his wife is really doing. And what is she really doing?
She's kind of leaving him.
Yep.
True. That's what she's doing.
And I mean, this is important. She's leaving him, but was there any avenues open to her leaving him?
She was definitely searching for one.
She was looking, but what, like, realistically, what could she do if it's Catholicism to this day does not allow for adultery, but you can go get forgiven, right? Like,
That doesn't stop her though.
there's something that to this day Catholicism would not divorce, right? So like she doesn't have a way out. She cannot get divorced. Like if they're practicing Catholics, like that was not an option. So she does the only thing she can do, which is to like leave him and just go off to her little house. Do you think there's some other way that he could explain this? I love his they actually redo the house. I think that there's like an interesting sort of like, imagine having so much money that you could just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna redo the house because my wife left. How else do you think in that particular society could she have gotten away with what she did and have people understand?
I don't think she could.
Which leads us to our next question, right? So she doesn't have a lot of options. So we all agree. In some of my classes, people have said, I don't think she committed suicide. We don't know. What makes you guys agree? Like, yeah, she committed suicide.
She's already left everything She can't go with that pervert Robert.
Wait, Robert's not a pervert.
I mean, saddling up next to married women. I don't like that at all.
Robert is actually Robert comes out, his hands are clean. It's not Robert who, like, I don't think anybody's a pervert
And
in the
he's
book.
a tease, and that's even worse.
He's a what?
Yeah, he's a tease. Then
He's a tease. Yeah. He's a tease.
that's
for
even
sure.
worse, honestly.
Okay, so
And then she
but
already she already left pretty much left her husband and kids, and she doesn't want to have to deal with the shame of having crawling back to that. And no one
Yeah.
else would accept her for her choice. She'd have to live like in exile, like Mademoiselle Reitz.
yeah, but Mademoiselle Reitz, is her life that bad? She lives up in the attic.
Certainly not, but must be different from her perspective.
Yeah. So, but here's the interesting thing. Robert is playing by the rules. Their relationship is not consummated.
Mm.
Robert, and she does sleep with someone who's not her husband. I'll say Robin. And the whole town seems to know. All of New Orleans seems to somehow know that Alcé is a ladies' man. So obviously, like this happens, right?
Mm.
So like it's not, since we know that Alcé sleeps around, like people, it's old as the hills, people sleeping around. Like she could have just like said, okay, she could have crawled back to her husband and said, yeah, I had a moment, and I'm going to conform now, and I'm going to be the wife. But she doesn't, right? She does what? What does she do? It's interesting.
She said goodbye, like how Robert did, like in the note.
Mm-hmm. And then they're back at Grand Isle, right? So let's see. She says goodbye in a letter. And what does she say? I love you, goodbye, because I love you. No, that's what he said to her. He says to her, I love you, goodbye. And then she commits suicide because he's actually, maybe he's the one with, notice we don't look at him. I like that you don't like Robert, but he doesn't do anything that's bad. He doesn't sleep with her. He's nice to her. I mean, what did you say he was? Somebody called him something.
I call him a tease.
A tease, yeah. Like, is it evil to be a tease? She was supposed to understand that he was teasing her. Like that is in the beginning. Like, be careful with Edna because she's not understanding that you just do this with women, and she doesn't. She doesn't understand. She takes him seriously, and I don't know. Do you guys think Robert is a bad guy?
But is that an okay thing to do to women?
To tease them? That's a great question. That is a
Like
totally.
that, kind of like make him reevaluate, like maybe not so bad, but you still shouldn't be doing that to married women at a.
I mean, actually, this is another one that's like as old as the hills, like the Don Giovanni figure, the Don Juan. Should you be leading on women because they might take you seriously?
You should be especially scared if you're leading on the wife of the Don Juan.
Well, everyone says that. This is also, I find fascinating that Edna's husband is just like the best husband. Did you notice that several times he's referred to as everyone's jealous of Edna because she's got this awesome husband? So in the end, he probably is an okay guy. Does it matter? Like, it's not about him in the end. It's about her. It's not like Léonce Pontellier did anything that was out of the ordinary or evil. And whether Robert did something that's bad, for me, that's up for grabs. I think he's naughty. I don't think he's evil. What about some other voices, some other quieter folk? What do you think about Robert as a flirt as a hopeless flirt. Is that an evil thing to do?
I feel like it was known that Robert did this every year because like even the husbands didn't worry about it when the women were with Robert because that was just how he was. It's not that most people took him seriously.
And he doesn't do anything. What does he do? He doesn't really do anything. He goes to Mexico. And then there's this whole other thing between like his brother and Mariquita. Like, I feel like there's still elements, having read this a million times, like I still don't quite understand the Mexican girl Mariquita and the brother, Robert's brother. So for better or for worse, Edna takes him seriously. Mrs. Pontellier took him seriously, and she goes back to Grand Isle, and we don't really know like why she went alone, who she's with. The season is not open. The swimming, they say the water's too cold, and she strips and she swims out. Why? Nobody's.
So, I think no, a lot of people are like, so she wouldn't be embarrassed by everything, but that's not at all why she did it, in my opinion, and in my reading of it. The whole novel is about her trying to get out of like the mothering figure and to try and get away from all these social standings. And like even Robert's stuck with the social standings and how it's supposed to be, and she wants to break away from that. And so she had the conversation that her friend Adele was worried about, where she said she'd give up a lot for her children, but she wouldn't give up herself and who she was. And by the end of the novel, she felt like society was pulling her to try and give away herself and who she was. And so that was her way of like freeing herself from those societal expectations pushing down upon her. And it was like the only way she saw out. So it wasn't like she was scared of what other people thought. It was she didn't want to deal with it anymore.
It is about motherhood. There's this creepy line. Have you ever heard this used ironically? What about the children? It's not really your generation. You have somebody, I saw somebody. So what does that mean? What about the children?
Well, they don't have a mom anymore.
Well, isn't that used like whenever people are like trying to get divorced or something? Like they'll go to the mom and be like, well, what about the children? Like, why would you do that for the kids and stuff?
And literally, so all of a sudden everybody uses literally incorrectly, but literally means it's in the book, it's in the literature. So literally, Adele says, think of the children, think of them. So how does Adele know that, like, why are the children an issue? I totally agree that it's not really about her social standing. Like, she's already, like, she is out there having coffee and going to the art classes, going to the racetrack and betting money. I mean, well, for whatever reason, it's the betting for me that's like, oh my God, she just didn't care anymore. Like, I think I have different standards. Like, that to me is like she was doing something. It's beyond like sleeping with Alcé. It's like she was just out there betting, but like we all have our moral codes, and for me, betting is like, oh my God. So she is already out there in society betting and sleeping with Alcé, and she didn't get to sleep with Robert. I don't feel like that's enough of a reason to commit suicide, but I think there's something about those children.
I think she felt like she couldn't be a mother to them, at least the mother they deserve, because she low-key didn't want them. Like, she liked them.
I mean, I think you can love things and not want them. I think you can have this weird like that, and that is like maybe maybe there is something to this bipolar. You can love something and still not want to have to take care of it every day. I mean, should we judge Edna and say she's a horrible person and to bring children into the world that she didn't want to take care of? She didn't even have to take care of them. She really didn't. She had servants to do that. Like, what do you think that it is? I deeply believe it's the children that she's like, I can't have the life I want. I don't want to belong to a man. I'm not that into being a mom. What else is there in that society? And she doesn't want to be Mademoiselle Rights for whatever reason. She can't really actually be that person. Is there any other reason that she could have committed suicide? Anybody disagree that she commits suicide because of the children? Right. It's one of the readings. I mean, this is discussed that we don't quite know why Edna does it, but it's a commonly discussed ending that she, at the very end, the second to last paragraph, she thought of Léonce and the children. They were a part of her life, but they need not have thought that they could possess her. They need not thought that they could possess her body and soul. And so, yeah, the whole thing, the whole family thing. And from your perspective as Louisianans, do you think that family is especially important in Louisiana? More than other places? Do I have anybody who's not Louisianan besides Oklahoma? From Louisiana originally, though. Well, I mean, family's important everywhere, guys. I think that this story has resonance and people keep reading it because it's the family. I mean, to some extent it's Léonce, but I just think that the children are what she couldn't cope with. Do you think that the extreme importance on having a family in Louisiana culture makes for better parents and mothers in life?
I think it puts a lot of pressure on like the women, especially at that time, because that was kind of like their only avenue besides like those twins going to a nunnery.
Right.
So,
Be a
like,
mom, go to a nunnery, or be Mademoiselle Rights up in the attic. Listen to this. So I feel like I don't tell anybody how to run their business, but when the vaccine became available at Nichols last week, I mentioned it to a class. I said, you all know that you can get it if you want. I got it. I think it's a good idea. And a student told me not doing it. So I had to say why. Just curious to find out why she thought the vaccine was like something she didn't want to do. And she said, actually, my mother is not allowing me to. And I was like, okay. So I had to know why. Any ideas what her response was? Why her mom wouldn't let her get the vaccine?
it would affect her fertility.
Bingo. How did you know? Because I was like, what when I heard that? Like I try not to be judgmental. Like I definitely don't want to insult anybody's choice about anything. But I was like, that was the last thing on my mind. How do you know that?
I've heard a lot of talk about it. My dad has strongly discouraged me from getting the vaccine because of that reason, even though I've told him I've done research and all the worries about fertility are like not founded in any factual evidence.
Yeah, it's a family thing. Like people want grandchildren, people want families are very important. I don't necessarily think it's a Louisiana thing. I think it's a universal thing that people find it very important to have the line continue and to reproduce society. Do you notice that Edna does not go to her sister's wedding? Yeah, she's out. She's not into it. So let's end there. I feel like 2.5 hours is plenty. Does anybody have questions going forward? And let me just remind you of what I'm going to ask you to do next time. So here's your book. You need to own this book. I was not able to find a free version. This book is a honker. It is about the Acadians after they spend 15 years in Savannah, Georgia. So they are expulsed in what's called, in English, we call it the French and Indian Wars. In every other language, it's called the 7-Year Wars. Do you know why in English it's the French and Indian War?
Because the colonists were fighting the French and their allied Native American tribes. So
Exactly. So, and this happens in 1755. So the colonists being the English colonists. And where's Louisiana in that part of in this period? What are we up to in 1755?
Are we a French colony? Yeah.
Being a French colony.
We're either wrapping it up being a French colony, or we're on the eve, we're like right there becoming a Spanish colony. So by the time that Acadians do come to Louisiana, we're Spanish. So this is during the 1750s to the 1760s, and then to the 1770s, and what's happening in the United States in the 1770s. Speaking of colonies.
Mayhem.
Mayhem. Yeah, well, I mean, a good thing if you're a good patriot. 1776, right? There's the American Revolution. So these Acadians end up in Georgia, and they decide to go back to Acadia. Meanwhile, the world is changing. Things are becoming Spanish, things are becoming American. Canada is shifting around borders, and the Quebecois are sort of creating their culture away from the English colonists. It's confusing because there's all this stuff is going on, and there's these different narrator voices with the same name. So there's Pelagie the Grouch, and this is a really common name, 19th, 18th century name. In fact, Kate Chopin she's written a book called, she wrote a short story called Madame Pelagie. So this is just a woman's name. And Pelagie the Grouch is retelling some of the story of Pelagie the Cart, named after the cart that they're carrying stuff and themselves from Georgia all the way back to Canada. So I want you to read from the prologue to 150, and then to write 5 questions and put them in the link. Let me show you the link on Moodle. Boop. Okay, so just so that there's no uncertain, let me just get out of there. View, exit, share. And there you go. So because, and I could be wrong that maybe you guys are going to find this accessible and interesting, but because so far my 200 levels, some of them said at the very end, I'm like, let's reflect on this book that you hated. Some of them are like, it was new and challenging, but it was actually like nothing I've ever read before. So maybe that will be some of your responses to it, I'm hoping. What I want us to be also thinking about, so if there's something you don't understand, or if you're just confused, just write that, just put the text in, the page number, and then we can discuss it if other people found that section confusing. And I want us to be in the constant mode of thinking, what is similar between these people and anything that you recognize today in Louisiana? as part of Acadian culture, if you do recognize anything at all, or if you think, no, this is completely different. Because remember, these are exiled people from Nova Scotia who've just spent 10 years in Savannah. Did you know that that's an actuality, that did happen? They went all over, the Acadians went all over, and the ones that came to Louisiana came between 1765 and 1785, and they had already spent 20 years in France. They went back. So the Louisiana Acadians went back to France and then came to Louisiana. Crazy, huh? Okay, I see yawns. I feel you. See you on Saturday, 10 a.m. Bye. Monsieur Maillet, tu es toujours là?
Oui, moi je suis là. T'as recordé à Stella.
Oui, je pense. Je le fais toujours.
Et c'est bon.
C'est bon, c'était intéressant?
Oui, c'est intéressant. Et moi j'ai fait des remarques, des notes. À cause là, je crois que moi je peux parler après le pain, Evangeline, qui se bagasse. Mon gain bagasse côté moi.
Ah ouais,
c'est
c'est
derrière
vrai?
la maison. Oui. À cause moi, j'ai fait des papiers avec ça. J'ai fait du papier avec ça.
Il faut que tu nous montres. Ça, je ne savais pas qu'on puisse faire des papiers. Je savais qu'il y avait des murs qui ont été faits. Une sorte de, what's that called?
C'est comme un chipboard.
Oui, exactement.
Oui.
J'en ai un peu dans ma maison.
Oui. C'est pas vraiment la meilleure chose pour papier, mais ça gagne une bonne texture. Il a une bonne texture.
Oui, on dit que ça fait des merveilles. Il y a toutes sortes de choses, biofuel et des différentes affaires on peut faire avec. Oui, bon, en fait, tu parles de ce que tu veux, mais remarque, tous ces Arsenault et Mélenchon et Chenier, personne ne parle même pas un mot de français. Peut-être c'est comme ça partout, mais moi, je trouve que c'est extraordinaire que mes étudiants ne s'intéressent pas trop à la langue.
Oui, et ça, pardon, ça, je parle pas en français à Stella, mais je parle en Courivini tous les jours.
Moi, j'adore entendre ça. Moi, j'entends, je comprends, mais j'ai du mal à me forcer à sortir des mots.
OK. Ça fait, on va continuer en Courivini si c'est OK.
C'est bon, c'est parfait.
Ça fait, oui, moi, t'ai remarqué personne t'a choisi, n'avait personne qui t'a choisi ça pour la langue. Et c'est comme, mais bro, zot pas connaît la lutte, bataille qui t'est, et vraiment, il est en haut un côté qui pas gagné, malheureusement, et il pas connaît.
Non, ça c'est complètement vrai. Ils n'ont pas de bon modèle. Ils n'ont que moi qui est là, moi qui a 50 ans. Oh, le français, c'est important. Il y a une autre langue qui s'appelle le Courivini. C'est triste. Et je peux pas, je ne sais pas quoi faire.
Moi non plus. Pardon. Moi, t'ai gain ça coupé à cause moi tapé peinturé des
Attention. Quelque chose est versé.
Attention, ça c'est quelque chose qui t'est tombé, c'était de l'eau.
Oh, c'est bon. Moi aussi, j'ai versé de l'eau, j'ai coupé la vidéo quand Christophe parlait. C'est difficile à gérer.
Oui. Espère un moment. Mais on va montrer toi. M'a travaillé en haut des peintis.
Mais ce que j'aimerais qu'on fasse, est-ce que tu acceptes si je te pose des questions en français et tu réponds en Courivini et comme ça, ils vont voir. Hein? Il y a des différentes langues, il y a des gens comme toi qui sont de Louisiane, qui sont jeunes, qui le parlent. On peut faire 10 minutes comme ça?
Oui, nous autres, oui. on fait ça, et ça, c'est bon et tout, à cause là, nous avons dit, là, moi, me comprendre français, bien sûr. Moi, j'ai étudié, moi, j'ai couru là-bas à Saint-Anne 3 fois.
3 fois?
Mhm.
Mon Dieu, tu es plus cadien que tu adorais la Saint-Anne, quoi.
Mais, ouais, moi, j'ai l'aimé structure et aussi, il n'a pas vraiment l'immersion ici. Moi, j'ai bien pour faire mon chaîne l'immersion. Quand moi, j'ai étudié français dans la région. Mais moi, j'ai fait ça, à cause moi, j'ai couru là-bas, là, moi, comprendre comment faire mon propre immersion pour moi-même en cours de venir, en une autre langue.
Oui, c'est clair. Une fois,
parler.
on apprend une langue, on apprend 2 langues. Donc, toi, tu as appris 2 langues et tu vois comment il faut que ça se fasse. Hein. Moi, avec une bonne immersion, je pourrais apprendre le Corivini et je ne suis pas une personne, tu es disciplinée, je ne suis pas disciplinée. Si j'étais entourée des gens, je suis très sociale, donc je n'ai pas envie d'étudier. J'adore les petits livres créoles, j'adore les groupes, mais je n'ai pas envie d'étudier. Je ne suis pas une bonne étudiante.
C'est tout bon, c'est tout bon. Et ça, on a des rencontres de temps en temps en Zoom, mais ça dure comme 3 ou 4 heures pendant la nuit.
Oh, wow. Et c'est tout en Corivini?
Pas tout en Corivini à Stella, à cause nous avons un monde qui va venir, il ne va pas comprendre tout quelque chose, mais il va pas apprendre. C'est comme une immersion. Et tout, et nous autres, c'est Cliff, vraiment, c'est Cliff Saint-Laurent.
Oh, non, Cliff, il est incroyable.
Oui.
Ce boug-là.
Oui, moi d'accord. Ça fait, il va commencer des petits.
Il fait des blagues, c'est ça qui fait la différence. Il fait des blagues, il chante, il est extraordinaire. Le fait que Cliff et que Christophe vivent là où ils vont, ils sont pas ici, c'est n'importe quoi. Mais aussi dans un sens, ils me comprennent bien parce que moi, je suis là, le français est important, la langue. Il y a des Indiens, vraiment, il y en a qui parlent français. Donc, ils comprennent que c'est une voix dans le vide.
Ça fait, là, ça c'est premier, mon tapé peinturé en haut.
Ah, c'est beau. Ça,
Merci.
c'est une cyprière. Avec
C'est
la
la
barbe
cyprière.
espagnole.
C'est cyprière là. Qui c'est? Oh, au lac Force Point. Lac Force Point.
Ça, c'est Point Coupé?
Non, ça c'est côté Nouvelle-Libérie.
Ah, ok, je connais pas.
Comme il y a Nouvelle-Libérie et bassin Atchafalaya et lac Force Point, c'est direct là.
J'adore comment il y a des fausses parts. C'est fausse et en créole, c'est face point.
Lake Force. Oh, pardon, Force. M'a dit fausse à cause ma.
Face. C'est bon, j'ai compris fausse. Mais j'adore qu'il y a des fausses. Parce que ça me semble très les explorateurs. Oh, c'est pas le vrai, c'est le faux.
Oui, c'est ça. Lake Force Point. Lac Force Point en français et Lac Force Point.
Moi, j'étais compris de toute façon.
Ouais,
je savais que c'était faux.
Et puis, ma travail en haut ça ici, c'est Bayou Vermillon.
Ah, c'est beau aussi. Est-ce que ça, c'est une sorte de tuyau pour l'eau? Sewage drain?
Ah oui. Mais c'est pas vraiment un sewage drain.
Non, c'est le drainage, c'est le drainage.
Oui, c'est comme ça. Il y a des trois coulées qui connectent à Bayou Vermillon. Ça, c'est plus ou moins mon processus, c'est comme 1000 pieds de ça y est gain là-bas. Il y a un petit parc côté Bayou Vermillon à Lafayette. Ça, c'est pas trop loin de ça. Mais en haut, ça, Mon procure, il est des côtés, ça c'est comme pour faire la charge. Ça fait, aussi un petit brin peut-être dangereux.
Mais tu
Faire la charge,
dors,
c'est aussi
tu dors où?
raison.
Est-ce que tu
Hein?
restes là-bas? Tu restes là-bas?
Non, non.
vas
Moi,
dans-
moi ici à Bâton Rouge.
Mais est-ce que quand tu y vas, tu passes la nuit?
De temps en temps, de temps en temps. Moi, t'ai dessiné tout quelque chose, mon montre-toi, en 2017.
Oh, wow, ça fait longtemps
Ça fait au moins 3 années, mais proche 4 années, depuis que j'ai dessiné tout panneau toi ici. Et c'est juste, moi, tu connais mon gain pour juste prendre temps, pour jongler après ça, mon fait, mon expérience avec tout ça.
Ah, c'est bien. Quand est-ce que
ouais.
tu as fait le Bayou Corn? Tu avais un tableau?
Oh! Mon gain D. Moi, j'ai fait un en 2014 ou 15 et un en 2013 qui était en haut une carte de Magic the Gathering.
Oui.
Ouais. Ouais, ça là, en haut, petite carte ça, c'est ça moi j'ai fait avant. Et puis là, moi j'ai fait un autre avec dos au mur. Avec grand dos au mur.
Oui, c'est ça dont je me
Oui.
souviens.
Ouais.
Et ça m'a frappé parce que cette histoire de l'environnement dans Bayou Corn, c'est extraordinaire, c'est horrible.
Oui.
Ça, c'est un
Oui.
peu dans les environs de Thibodeau. Tu as fait des choses à Pierre-Part?
Oui, moi j'ai fait mais ma travaillé en haut à notre penti de Pierre-Part, c'est juste à côté. C'est Cipriella derrière nos anciens camps. Nous autres avons un camp là-bas. C'était tout petit. Il n'avait des bunk beds qui étaient welded en dedans.
Tu dormais dans le camp? Tu dormais?
Mhm. Moi, j'ai dormi là-bas.
Tes parents ont vendu le petit camp?
Oui,
Oh.
oui. Mais c'était à cause mon papa l'était vendu. Premièrement, au premier, il était vendu sur bateau. Et puis là, il était vendu au camp à cause nous n'avons pas gagné un bateau, ça fait. Mais c'était pour aider payer pour mon collège, pas mon collège, pour
tes études.
Lycée. Qui c'est lycée? High school? Pour aider avec ça.
Qui c'est lycée? Je ne sais pas, en Louisiane, on dit premier livre, deuxième livre, de lycée, je ne sais pas. Pour high school?
Là, moi, pas connaître. Oui, high school. C'était high school. Moi, connais lycée à cause tu connais français et l'immersion.
Est-ce
Ouais.
que tu étais à quelle école, quel lycée à Bâton Rouge?
Une école qui n'existe plus.
Ah oui? Comment ça s'appelait?
Il s'appelait Runnels High School. Ça fait Runnels, mon c'est capable de courir là-bas quand il était bien petit, comme, qui c'est ça? Before first grade, before kindergarten, comme, preschool.
En français, c'est la maternelle.
OK. Là. Jusqu'à 12e grade. Jusqu'à 12e grade. Mais moi, j'étais là de 7e grade jusqu'à 12e grade. Et c'était comme une prep school pour collège. Nous autres capables pour faire n'importe quelle chose, nous autres avec nos lards. Nous autres capables pour mettre ça nos laits, ça nous autres comme vêtements. Mais tu connais, c'était une école privée. Ça coûtait
oui,
cher.
Tu as dit que tes parents ont vendu la terre pour tes études.
Oui. Oui.
C'est gentil.
Et aussi un bateau. Mon bateau, ça t'écoutait plus cher parce que quand nous autres gagnés. C'était un basket.
Wow.
Oh, et nous autres, c'est courir là-bas à Doulage et tout ça. Lac Doulage et tout
C'est
ça.
que moi, j'aimerais avoir un camp, comme tu dis, très simple, avec des bonnes beds, rien, juste parce qu'on a des ouragans et les inondations tout le temps en ville. Il faut que je trouve un autre moyen d'échapper. Mais moi, je pense que si jamais j'ai suffisamment d'argent, j'aime bien Donaldsonville. Il y a de belles maisons. C'est un peu Chemical Alley.
Oh, c'est beaucoup ça. C'est
Ouais,
beaucoup
je
ça.
Je sais.
Mo-
C'est pas
euh,
vraiment de la nature, mais je suis pas une personne de très. J'aimerais avoir une Creole cottage très simple avec rien, mais juste là où je peux me héberger s'il faut.
Oui, moi et tout. À Donaldsonville, il y en a au milieu un clos de con. Au milieu un clos de con, un clos Yégan, et c'est pas une forêt, mais c'est comme un chênier, une chênière avec des chênes verts et des autres chênes là-bas. Là. Mais c'est tout petit, comme au milieu. Tu gagnes pour traverser clos ça, là, juste pour rentrer dans
Dans
une
une petite forêt, oui.
Oui. Mais ça, c'était propriété qui sont famille à mon ami Evan Gomez. Li dans mythologie louisianaise. C'était m'oublier ça, Beverly Matern, l'ité pelé so l'histoire.
Je sais pas qui c'est Gomez. Les Louisianais créoles.
L'idée son espagnol, yeah. Et aussi français, yeah. Bourgeois. Yeah.
Voilà.
Ouais,
Écoute,
c'est ça.
il faut que je voie mon mari parce que j'étais avec mes vieux parents pendant une semaine et je suis rentrée très tard hier et je ne l'ai même pas vu et il vient de rentrer. Donc,
OK.
si tout ce que tu fais la semaine prochaine, ça sera bon, je suis sûre. Donc, je vais leur dire qu'on va se parler un peu parce que je veux qu'ils voient que tu parles créole. Moi, je te comprends. Je sais que c'est une autre langue. Je sais ce que c'est. Donc, je pense que ça leur ferait un peu de... C'est mieux de rien.
Oui, et peut-être ça va donner un spark. Ça fait...
Il faut de la jeunesse. Tu n'es plus vraiment la jeunesse.
Mais merci encore. C'était magnifique.
Merci à toi. OK, à
Pas de quoi.
bientôt.
À bientôt.
À la semaine prochaine.
À voir plus tard.
Ciao.